Hi, I'm John Paul and a really warm welcome back to my channel. Today what I'm going to be talking about, it's actually replying to a subscriber's question, and what they've said is, how the heck do I know if I'm going to be a good counsellor? They've said that what they know of themselves is that they don't necessarily think they're a great people person, in their words, and also they're a bit introverted, but they have had a good experience in therapy. They have found it helpful, they have found it interesting. So how the heck do they know if they're going to be a good counsellor? And does the training, in their words, the master's program, transform you into one? So what I'm going to do is, as I say, try and answer that question or give some reflections on that question. So I'm going to talk about the qualities that I would say, from what I've seen, would make a good therapist. And then I'm going to go back to reply to the detailed bits in that question as well. I'm also going to take in a comment that somebody else put below the video that I put up about how much you can earn as a therapist, and I'll put a link to that here. And what that person said below the video is that they believe that in order to make the money that they would need to make to be a therapist, they would have to have this portfolio career, which is something I was talking about in that video. And what they say in their comment is that they think they're a bit too lazy, in their words, to do that. So I'm also going to bring in that comment too, because I think it ties in well to the kinds of things that I'm going to be saying about this issue. So back to, what makes a good therapist. I'm going to say therapist rather than counsellor here, just because that's the term that I would usually use. I think it's a subjective experience, isn't it? What makes a good therapist? There are definitely some common qualities that I would say, having been around therapists for a long time, in groups of therapists and on a one-to-one basis, there are definitely some common kind of personality traits and qualities. So I'm going to talk about them. But as I say, there is also definitely a subjectiveness to this. There are people that I would know as therapists who I wouldn't necessarily refer clients to, and they've been in the industry for a long time and have busy practices. So there's definitely an element of subjectivity about it. Of course, this is my opinion, my experience. It's based on who I would choose to be around, I suppose. Having said that, there are environments where it isn't necessarily choice. It's made up of lots of different people and strangers as far as other therapists, and I can still see a number of these qualities. So, as I say, I'm going to run through some of them. Just to say as well, of course, this isn't a situation where these kinds of qualities dominating are sort of the exclusive preserve of therapists. There are some people who would never have been near a therapy room. You might say have grown up in very well-loved environments who would demonstrate all of these qualities as well. As ever, I would love to hear what you think of all this, your experience of, what makes a good therapist, anything that you agree with, disagree with in terms of what I say. I'd love to hear that. Please either comment on it below the video or send me a separate email. If you do find the video helpful, please do like it. Please do share it if you think anybody else will find it helpful. And also please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Okay, so what makes a good therapist? The first thing, as far as, kind of common traits, this might sound like a strange thing to start with, but that one of the things about the training that I think happens is, rather than make everybody very similar, what going through the training means, when it sort of turns down more that fear in people perhaps, and makes them more connected to self and their own skills and their own qualities and competencies, so more trusting of self, which I think is something, my experience of the training, that's something that it did, and more trusting of other people as well. One of the things that results from that with people is actually they are more comfortable being more individual, if you see what I mean. So people are similar as far as some traits that I would see in people, but also there's very much an individuality with therapists, definitely. And you can see that, I think, in all the different modalities that there are out there, all of the different ways that people choose to work, the kind of portfolio careers. I mean, just to talk about some of them, of course, there's group therapists, couples counsellors, people that work with child and adolescent, adults, people that work with EMDR, emotional freedom technique. There are probably 100 different modalities, people that work in all kinds of different environments, schools, hospitals, prisons, universities, GP surgeries. As I say, the people that are employed, the people that are in private practice, people that work in the media, therapists that are more activists. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but I think you probably know what I mean. And you look at some of the conversations that I've had with therapists, you can see that they all set up their careers quite differently. So there is something very much about the training and about being around therapists as well, is that there is definitely an individuality. I would say people have gone in to do those things which was congruent and authentic to them, and it can be quite different to what the person sitting next to them in that group of therapists does. So I wanted to say that first. It's not as if everybody's very similar. It's not as if everybody lives a very similar life, but there are these common traits. So what are they? The first one would be, which may not surprise people, would be that there is a curiosity generally about life. I can see that in people. Therapists wouldn't necessarily be that quick to kind of criticize or condemn something. Generally, there's an openness to new ideas. Of course, people have their frame and their modality and the way that they work. But what I do notice about people that have been, around a while and doing it a while is they are open to new ideas as well. As I say, curious about how people work, why people do the things that they do, and that sort of self-reflective aspect. It's not just looking out at others, but reflection on self as well. So in environments with therapists, in my experience, where people may have kind of flared up, and that of course still happens, people do get reactive, that's part of being human, isn't it? People would self-reflect quite quickly. The training itself does encourage or require in some ways that turning inwards to map your own internal landscape. So if you do get triggered using the kind of vernacular with somebody, then there is always that, what happened for me there. So there is definitely that self-reflection, that kind of tolerance, I would say. And I don't mean tolerance as in kind of gritting your teeth through it. I mean tolerance as in allowing an experience without interference. So a lot of therapists that I would know, and I would say good therapists, they're able to tolerate, so allow without interference, everything that perhaps they think and feel, and therefore everything that other people think and feel. It's not that everything is all okay and somebody's not alive and having an experience in response to that, but there is, I can see this kind of openness and allowing of their own thoughts and feelings and acceptance of it, and also that allowing of other people's thoughts and feelings as well. From that point of view, of course, feelings, I would say generally amongst therapists would be quite high up the list of things that they'll be thinking and talking about, even in kind of social interactions. Again, probably not surprising. It's often the thing that's put at the bottom of the list when people are working, or perhaps when they're growing up, at school, university. So not surprising that it's something that would be sort of valued and focused on amongst therapists, as I say, of course, in the therapy room, but also when we're around each other. Generally paying attention. Like if you're in a group of therapists, I notice that people will be paying attention. The person that wrote this question said that they do have qualities, or see them in themselves, of empathy and sensitivity. And again, I would say that those qualities I could really see around groups of therapists. There is that empathy. If one person gets tearful, for example, you can see that other people will as well. Again, as I say, with all these things, that's not a particular necessarily to groups of therapists, but I do think it's something that I see more commonly around groups of therapists. So that empathy, imagining what somebody else is going to feel like, and actually feeling what somebody else feels, would be something that I would see around quite a lot. The sensitivity side of things, people would be sensitive to other people's feelings. I mean, therapists would laugh quite a lot generally, but they wouldn't be laughing at somebody necessarily. This kind of banter and teasing side of things, that would be more unusual for me in my experience around therapists. Similarly, something that I would have noticed when I started training as a therapist is that, and I really noticed this actually coming from kind of corporate environments and also some of the social environments that I was in, is that therapists didn't tend to gossip that much. And what are the reasons for that? I think it's because generally people feel connected in terms of that kind of emotional intimacy. That's something that's very much encouraged, vulnerability, emotional intimacy during the training. And if people feel connected in that way, you don't necessarily need to bond by, say, gossiping about other people. I'm not in any way making that a wrong thing, of course. I just think often the purpose of gossiping is to connect with other people. But if you are connecting on an emotional and of course an intellectual level as well, because you're interested in similar things, then I just think the need for that seems to fall away. Also, I talked about some people kind of reacting in groups with therapists, but going into the training, it does turn people inside out. That people come in, they may be traumatized, people come into the training, they've been hurt, and traumatized people can traumatize other people, hurt people can hurt other people. But as time goes on, I think people's reactivity does get less. So I would see that less, I think, amongst therapists. But if there is a difficulty, if there is annoyance or anger and frustration at something during the training, people are encouraged to talk about it. And I think that's a very important thing as well. If you're looking at perhaps this kind of gossip thing, is that also resentment wouldn't tend to be held as much, I wouldn't say, because, we're all encouraged to say the things that we find difficult. And if something has frustrated or annoyed us, we're encouraged to voice that. That kind of having voice, visibility, speaking your truth, feeling safe enough in any environment to be able to say the things that you're thinking and feeling. I definitely think that's something that's encouraged. I went to some training recently, which was some training given by a man about working with men. I was actually the only other man in the group. He started the training by saying that when he saw me, he was wondering whether he could take me in a fight, which, and that again is quite typical, I would say, of therapists, in that he's not afraid to say the thing that he was thinking. He's observing that. He thinks that's going to be helpful from the point of view of looking in the training that he was given about how men may compete with each other, and we have that competitive part potentially. So he knows, I guess, that I can tolerate that. It's observed, it's talked about, it's kind of tolerated and put in the middle. And I think that's very much a quality that I would see around amongst therapists, and of course in therapy, that would be really encouraged. So of course, active listening, people would be used to listening to other people. My experience of being in groups of therapists is that most people are kind of given their space. People are listening and paying attention to what other people say. And also during the training, people are encouraged to have a voice. And so people will be used to, I suppose, giving their view and opinion on things too. That I've noticed that around people that have been therapists for a while, they generally will have an opinion on things and will be used to saying it. Because, one of the things about being a therapist, I think the fear of others can dissipate. Therapists will largely create safe environments for each other, so people don't feel that fearful of saying the things that they need and want to say. And of course, hopefully that's something that's carried through into the therapeutic environment that the therapists create as well. So being able to listen and also being able to talk and communicate what's happening for them. I would say generally it's an optimistic profession. I think people do have an optimism. Often for clients, if you're looking at working with somebody who's quite depressed, it will be a therapist that will be holding that kind of hope and optimism. None of that, of course, is trying to push a client into that kind of toxic positivity place of denying difficult feelings, difficult experiences. As I said, being able to tolerate, without interference. If a client does experience hopelessness, or those kind of things, or despair, is an important quality for a good therapist to have, I think. And also, I do think that therapists will hold the hope often for somebody. So I think it's a fundamentally optimistic profession. Boundaries are also, of course, highly valued. A good therapist will have good boundaries, will be something that's very much worked on throughout the training. Honesty, equally highly valued. This idea of somebody being congruent and authentic. So being able to say what they think and feel, knowing that nothing that we can say will ruin a real connection with other people. Again, I think is a quality that I would often see encouraged. And there's no perfection with it all, is there? Perfection is all in people's minds, really. But definitely those would be qualities, actions, behaviours that I think would be encouraged around therapists. Warmth I can see as a quality generally as well. If people feel safer in life, if there is less fear of others, if people trust themselves more and trust others more, then anxiety is lower, isn't it? And that tends to allow people to be, because they feel safer, to be warmer around other people. Warmth and kindness, as I said, would be qualities that I would see around groups of therapists and around therapists individually as well. It's interesting, I went for some training once with a guy called Thaddeus Burchard, and it was in sex addiction. And he said that one of the reasons that he would say he's been so successful in his career, he's one of the main people in the UK for that, has written books. He said that one of the key things which he did is that he's kind to people. And that might sound like it's diminishing something. Of course, he then spoke for 8 hours about all kinds of things, you know, the kind of cognitive theory about, he runs a practice. So he's obviously being able to organize and run a business. He will have his boundaries, he'll have his focus and all those other qualities. But I think the point that he was making as well is that if you want to establish and maintain good therapeutic relationships with people, then there has to be that warmth and kindness there, really, and being able to offer that to clients. I mean, I would say on that, actually, warmth and kindness, invaluable qualities, aren't they, from the point of view of, as I say, establishing and maintaining a therapeutic relationship. The only thing is that sometimes, for my taste, I suppose, you know, if you've got this sort of warmth and kindness all the time and empathy, this kind of open-handed thing, very much encouraged and great in terms of therapy and therapeutic relationships, because we don't want to set anybody against what's happening for them. You know, there is always going to be that openness and kind of tolerance. I also think that sometimes, you know, this is probably needed too. Sometimes what will be happening with clients, or generally, is something that's unsafe, either psychologically or physically, and to be able to express that, I do think is something that is of value, where there's some kind of safety issue. And I would notice amongst therapists that this, you know, is often tipped back to this. Let's be nice, let's be kind. And absolutely, I mean, somebody is being kind. They're offering this hand, but there are some things we also need to be honest, I guess, and some things are dangerous. Some things, and therapists will need to at times reflect that back potentially. You know, it's often a therapist that might say that some behavior is abusive, even though that somebody's laughing at it, or that some early experience was traumatizing, or would seem to be traumatizing, again, even though somebody might be explaining that in a kind of disconnected way. So there is that, I see. I think this is so valuable. I just think sometimes as well, there probably needs to be, can we have a look at that behavior? You know, is that serving you? Because there's this non-judgmental thing, of course, with therapists as well, that therapists need to be non-judgmental. And of course, certainly not critical, certainly not jumping on something or shaming or criticizing somebody. The thing is, all human beings, including therapists, will be making judgments about things. You know, we're compelled in our brains to judge for safety. Is this somebody I want to be around? I just think that's, you know, that's intrusive, compelling for people. And therapists are, of course, human beings, just like anybody else. We're alive. So there will be, I suppose, judgments. There will be opinions, but it's not jumping on it, but equally not looking away or ignoring things as well. And as I said, I think there can be a push with some people among groups of therapists for it always to be here, and for somebody not necessarily to say, I'm just not sure about that, because we want to avoid, I suppose, being called judgmental or critical. So it'd be interesting to hear what you think about that. Just a few other honorary mentions, I suppose. You know, from a business point of view, this is often not seen that much or talked about that much, but of course, a good therapist who is in private practice will, for a period of time, have been running a business. So there must be those qualities somewhere, that drive there, the capacity to organize, focus, hold boundaries, you know, those things must be present too. You know, intellect, again, I've talked about how understandably, you know, emotions will be valued a lot, that they get a lot of focus. And I think it's because, as I said, in early experience and other environments, perhaps they're put lower down the list. So generally therapists, in my experience, will value them a lot. But equally, you know, the people that I know as therapists, they will be able to talk cognitively, intellectually, very articulately about the things that they're interested in. It's not necessarily a highly, well, there are, of course, academics in therapy, but it's not highly valued, I would say, or talked about that much, the kind of intellect. But I think if somebody combines things that they're cognitively, intellectually interested in with that kind of emotion, it connects with them emotionally. There's passion, excitement, joy, with the kind of things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, then that the intellect is working in line with somebody's emotion experience, and therefore, they will come across as competent and articulate in terms of the kind of things that they're talking about. So I do see that as well amongst therapists. Just wanted a couple of honourable mentions here for creativity and nature. A lot of therapists, I would say, if you talk to them, somewhere there'll be creativity. It can be in any form, really. It can be art, music, cooking, the way they dress, all kinds of things. So that definitely that's around. Nature, again, a lot of people would feel, I think, on some level, somewhere connected to nature. Both creativity and nature, for me, are in that territory of feeling connected to self and others. So when that happens more in life, then I think it's understandable that when kind of fear gets turned down, people feel more in touch with themselves, then they can become more creative. Equally, if they trust themselves more, trust others more, therefore feel more connected to the environment, then they will notice their environment more and probably appreciate and value nature more. The thing that I would also say about those two, creativity and nature, is they are ways to move through to a place more of connection as well. They're both, I think, a sign of feeling more connected and a cause of feeling more connected to self and the world. Just finishing off on these qualities, lack of competitiveness. I don't really feel necessarily a great competitiveness from other therapists generally. Like if you're moving through doing new things, people will largely be supportive or encouraging, or just neutral and not really that interested. So I don't feel very much that sort of need and want to compete, to put people down, who's winning, who isn't. A lot of people, they're following their individual path as far as the things that they're interested in and the things that they want to do. So I definitely don't feel that much competitiveness from others. It's not all about winning, not particularly goal focused, I would say, in terms of personality traits. That I think can be helpful from the point of view of when it's not all about comparisons and competition. And by the way, I think one of the reasons for that for people is that when, again, we're more in that place of connection with self and others, more trusting of self, more getting ourselves sort of internally validated, more is coming back from others as far as emotional intimacy, feedback from others. People are more free with that, as I think tends to happen when you go through into that place of more connection with self and others. Then people need to rely less, I think. Certainly they're less defended, but also need to rely less on winning in relationship with other people, because people get their a sense of meaning and purpose and feel good. Relationships can become life's best experiences, and when that happens more, then I think that will be something that makes somebody need to win less. Perhaps goals become less important, and equally need to protect themselves less. So fear and anger just seem to become less dominant. But as I've said in previous videos, I think the drive part, the competition part, the winning, the moving forward are very important from the point of view of moving forward through life. You're going to run a practice and develop things and grow over time. That has to be there. In my experience, it gets hooked onto that place of connection. So it sort of serves connection. And I think one of the slight disadvantages, I suppose, of it not being particularly competitive or driven, from what I can see as a default for people, is that, of course, if you want to be and be more entrepreneurial, which a number of the people that I've been speaking to in the conversation certainly have, then you are kind of doing it without others. So I think that can be a little bit of a disadvantage. I think that that's changing, though. I see that coming much more into therapy. People who want to do that, people who are having these portfolio careers and coming up with new ideas about things and apps and different ways to kind of deliver therapy and all those kind of things. So I definitely think that's coming forward more. So there are these qualities. What do you think? I mean, are they what you've experienced around, say, a good therapist, or as a therapist yourself? Is that what you've seen, these kind of things that you've seen? I'd love to hear if there is anything else that you'd like to add to that. I just now want to go back to the question that somebody asked. What they said was that they found therapy interesting and helpful, but they don't consider themselves to be a good people person or very good with people, and they're quite introverted. So can they be a good therapist? And will the training turn them into that? The key thing here is that very few people, I think, come into the training with these qualities dominant. One of the reasons that people come into training, and there's always going to be exceptions, but for a lot of people, they come in because they've had some difficulties in relationship, experienced trauma in relationship with other people, which can mean that absolutely these qualities are not as present. And part of the reason or the fundamental reason really for going through the training is to bring a number of these qualities much more forward and present in life, so that people can establish and maintain good therapeutic relationships with people. And what I would say to this person as well, when they say they're not a good people person or not very good with people, and also the introversion thing, something that's very important is to be curious about whether our personality or the things that we think and feel about ourselves and other people are part of our authentic, congruent personality, or whether they are adaptations to growing up in environments where we were around people whose values were not in accordance with ours, or we weren't treated particularly well. I mean, if you grew up in an environment where you were consistently criticized or traumatized, or somebody who was disconnected, not looking, neglect, that's absolutely going to mean that we develop beliefs about ourselves and other people. Necessarily, they're required in order to get through life and to survive that experience, but we won't develop a great perception of others in terms of trust of others. We might become incredibly self-reliant and therefore not have significant amounts of kind of intimacy and vulnerability with others, which might lead us to not having very connected relationships with other people. So we might, on that basis, believe we're not good with other people. We might also believe that we're naturally introverted. We always go in to sort our problems out rather than necessarily taking our energy from others. Introversion is, I think, a sort of congruent, authentic personality with some people, but some people believe they are, I think. They get that perception of themselves because they've adapted to difficult circumstances and environments growing up. So what I would say, I just have a feeling, I don't know this person, but the perceptions we have about ourselves and other people, I think I probably bracket them once going into some therapy training, and then see what it's like to be around people whose values are in accordance with yours. Not guaranteeing anything, of course, about who you're around, but the chances are, let's talk from my own experience, that when I went into training as a therapist, the values like, sensitivity, empathy, kind of warmth, paying attention, open communication, honesty, valuing emotional experience as much as intellectual experience, those qualities would have been a hindrance when I was working in corporate environments. There was some emotional intelligence needed, of course, but largely empathy for self would have been a hindrance, because if I thought about what I felt most of the time, I wouldn't be doing it. I'd be saying no to doing things, so I would have stopped working. Not that it was a masochistic experience, of course, but what I'm saying is that there are the qualities that suddenly go right to the top of the list, was my experience in around other therapists. That is a real flip reverse of what things were like before, and that can profoundly change your experience of yourself and other people, and therefore what you believe about yourself and what you believe about other people is likely to change over that process. If you're around therapists, or my experience of being around therapist training, as I say, of course there were people that reacted, of course people disconnected, of course there were some people I would have liked more than others, but I did notice that it was really strangers like me, I would say, when I went into groups of therapists, and that's still the case with meeting new therapists now. So when this person says that they are not good with people, as I said, I would reserve judgment on that. I'm not in any way, I'm not getting any commission from therapy training colleges here. I'm just saying your perception of yourself is based on what's happened up until now, based on your physiology and based on your environment. Maybe it's just the people that you're around. Maybe you trauma bonded in early experience, and therefore have stayed with people who aren't that great for you, who dysregulate you, but it's difficult to get out because that's what you're familiar with. And maybe you would go into an environment of training and things would be different, priorities would be different, values would be different. You're encouraged to say things, you're encouraged to express your annoyance and your anger. Of course, other people are going to respond to that too, but those qualities are suddenly up at the top, they're at the fore. And of course, you're probably going to be intellectually engaged with the types of things that you're interested in. What this person also said is that they find therapy interesting and helpful. So they find, I'm assuming, looking at themselves and others and how things work, they find that interesting. So that kind of curiosity, that quality that I'm talking about would seem to be present. And they've also said a therapeutic relationship is helpful. So again, I'm not in their therapeutic relationship, but if we assume that those qualities are present, that create, establish and maintain good therapeutic relationships, when this person has that in their lives, when that is what's present in their relationships, then that relationship is helpful. So it may be that those qualities just aren't present in the other relationships they have around them. So again, I'd really be listening to that. Again, not trying to, the most important thing when somebody goes into the training is not to force themselves to like and engage with it. It's to notice and drop inside when they're listening to things and when they're around other people on the training, and notice how it feels. Do that and lean into it, I suppose. Are you drawn to it? Do you find it interesting? Do you like these people? Do values seem to be similar? Do you feel safer and more at ease amongst this type of personality? I would notice when I'm around therapists, groups of therapists, that I would feel more at ease and relaxed than I might amongst other groups of people. Not surprising, I don't think, from my point of view, if you're looking at the kinds of qualities that I think would often dominate amongst therapists. People aren't necessarily going to criticize as much. They are likely, there's pressure to be honest in some ways. Of course, there is empathy, there would be kindness, there would be that warmth. So I think it's, it'd be interesting to see what it's like for this person in those kind of environments. But always checking in with self all the time. Is what effect is this having? What effect are these people having on me? Do I come alive here? Do I feel safe? Intellectually, with what I'm learning about, what I'm hearing about, do I come alive? Does this feel like being home? Just going back to, does it transform you into one, which is the question that they talk about the master's program, but the training, does it transform you into one? For me, for all the reasons that I've been talking about, it was really transformative. My trust in self, my own skills, competencies, those kind of things, mapping my internal landscape, thinking about how am I going to navigate life. I'd internalized all kinds of values from others, some of which worked for me, but others didn't. Ways of navigating things and relationships and who I should be around and who I shouldn't, and what do I do if somebody annoys me, or what do I do if I really want to be around somebody. All of those, I'd internalized a way of navigating things from other people, and what being in training to be a therapist enabled me to do was to sort of piece together my own frame there, my own template, and that has changed in some quite significant ways since completing the training. But when I was able to do that, I felt much safer in the world. I had more meaning and purpose. I felt more connected to self. I felt more connected to other people. So there definitely was something that was very transformative about that experience. I would say that it didn't stop, of course, on qualification. There are things that just last week would have changed things fundamentally for me. And that process of transformation, or things being different, trusting myself more, trusting other people more, would have been growing very much since the training too. So it's very much an ongoing process, and I'm sure it will continue. But I would say about the training that it was definitely enough for me not to look back and think, maybe I should go back to doing law. It was definitely transformative enough. It felt like coming alive enough, coming home enough to absolutely continue to go forward into the career. And just bringing in, as I said, this comment that somebody else made under the video about how much you can earn. They said that they felt a bit lazy, or they think they'd be a bit lazy to have a portfolio career. It's a similar point, I would say here. Look, I don't know the person, of course. fundamentally they need to trust themselves, don't they, about who they are. But I think I would probably wonder whether we ought to bracket what you believe about yourself based on how you experience life now. A lot of energy is actually emotional energy. So when people feel lazy, they're lacking the emotional energy. They lack passion, excitement, love, joy, those kind of things, which are the drivers, I guess, that we would generally want, and the things that give us a lot of energy. It may be that that person is lazy, in their words, because they lack emotional energy, because the things that they're doing, they're not connected with on any emotional level, say work or intellectual. I would say that myself personally, about being a lawyer. Some things were challenging. Mostly it didn't really connect with me intellectually that much, and certainly didn't do much for me emotionally. So I think what I'd probably say to this person is, when those two suddenly go into alignment, I suppose, when you're actually interested in what you're talking about and can choose to go into those things, and it also connects with you emotionally, and you really feel things, as I say, you feel aliveness and regulated and calm. When those two are in line, why don't you see what your energy levels are like? But as ever, trust yourself. I'd notice what you're feeling, go into those environments, and then see what happens. Really look at what happens in your body. Look at what happens when you listen to people talking about these particular subjects. What is it that interests you? Do you come alive? As I say, do you feel at home? Who do you want to go towards? Who are the people that really draw you and excite you? Or do they? So listening to all of that. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's been interesting. As I say, I would love to hear what you have to say about it all. Any comments that you might have, please do put them below the video or email me separately. Please let me know if there are any other subjects that you would be interested in me covering. Please do like the video if you found it helpful. Do share it if you found it interesting. And please do subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for listening. You take care, and I'll see you again soon.